because I just put the mic on. So. Can you count to 10 or 8 or anywhere you want to count to?
Right now?
Yeah.
Mr. Miller, they're just going to do a sound check. If you could just count to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay, Mr. Miller, we're rolling, so whenever you're ready, go ahead and you can begin.
Okay, my name is Robert Miller. I'm just on 82 years old. I enlisted in the American Army in London, England in early 1945. 5 days after I was sworn in at the embassy, I found myself walking up a hill in France in the pouring rain with a gun on my shoulder. I was homesick as hell, didn't know where I was at. I was on the verge of tears. I was then put in a replacement, Repel Depot they were called, with a bunch of grizzly old war veterans who would tear your head off at the drop of a nickel. And me, coming immediately from a loving home, found this extremely difficult to bear. Subsequently, I was given 6 weeks of basic training with converted Air Corps. Now, the Germans ran out of gas, as a result of which they had really no Air Force when we invaded Europe. So we had a surplus of airmen, and I took basic with them, being prepared to go to invade Japan. I believe every Saturday we got shots here and shots there and shots here and shots there for this disease and that disease and every other damn disease that God ever invented. On Monday mornings our arms were about ready to fall off. Anyway, eventually we were shipped down to Marseille, France, and put on a boat headed to invade Japan. You may know that the Russians were friends of ours at that time, and this was to have been a joint invasion of Japan. We no sooner got on the boat than then President Harry Truman dropped the first atomic bomb. This kind of put the whole world on hold. The Japs still refuse to acknowledge the power of this weapon, and subsequently turned down a surrender offer. Some 3 days later, we dropped another one, which time they realized this weapon was catastrophic and was nothing to fool with. They then capitulated, net result of which we were taken from the ship, bivouacked on the dock at Marseille. They didn't really know what to do with us. But eventually they sent us back into Germany and formed what was then known as the Constabulary. As you may know, Germany had a military government which was controlled by the United States. Our job then was to denazify Germany. And some of it was chipping swastikas off of buildings, burning iron crosses, all of the stuff that went to make up the Nazi empire was knocked off. Subsequently, the job of the constabulary was also to police Germany. and I became an investigator in the constabulary. Had some very interesting experiences with murders, suicides, and things of that nature. In '46, I was formed up with a detachment, shipped up to Bremerhaven. Now, the American military is obligated to pay you back to your point of induction. But since I was born in the States, I wanted to get back to the States. So they said, well, if you sign this affidavit saying that when you get to the States, you won't claim your fare back to London, we'll take you. So they did take me. And I spent 4 or 5 years here in the Buffalo, New York area. Actually about 4.5. Because of the Blitz in England when I was younger, the schools were basically closed because they had no air raid shelters and children were not allowed to congregate. So I basically had a 12th grade, well, I forget what you got, a 12-year-old education, not a 12th grade. 12th, when I was 12, school, effectively, that was it. And so I went over there on a GI Bill, got an education, came back here, went into business, subsequently sold the business, retired in Florida, and here we are today. So shoot.
All right. What made you decide to go into the Army?
I was afraid that if I didn't, the British would draft me. And I didn't, you know, the food was better in the American Army, the pay was better in the Army, and I liked the uniforms better. So I joined the American Army.
How did your family and friends react to your decision?
Well, since most of my friends obviously were English, I used to have an old saying during the war about an American soldier in Europe or in England. They're over here, they're overpaid, they're overfed, and they're oversexed. So the British didn't always get along with the American soldier. So I think my friends would have preferred to see me join the British forces. Okay?
Did you have a girlfriend at the time?
Yeah, I did, as a matter of fact. She wasn't as cute as you are, but she was okay. Yeah.
And what was her reaction?
Pardon?
What was her reaction to when you joined?
I think that was okay initially, but she kind of expected me to go back to England and settle down. And when I didn't, of course, that ended.
What was your most memorable experience that you gained from being in the Army?
That's a tough one. The most memorable? Well, I guess the most memorable at that time was initially we were guarding SS prisoners. And because the prisons were so far removed from the guardhouse, instead of pulling 4 on and 4 off, you were pulling 8 on and 8 off. And we used to be up in those little raised things you see on TV with the, you know, they're all wood. And I fell asleep one night, but it was in the middle of the winter. I built a little fire in my helmet liner. And that tipped over and it set this whole damn thing on fire. The prisoners down behind the wire are screaming and hollering and woke me up, put the fire out. I don't know how memorable that was, but it was an experience.
Did you lose any close friends while you were in the Army?
Pardon?
Did you lose any close friends while you were there?
I lost a lot of close friends, yeah. Both in the Army and in the bombing of London.
When you think back on your experience, what image or event do you constantly remember that was most vivid to you?
What event do I remember?
Yeah, just anything that was...
Getting out of the Army.
So, what was your worst experience in the Army?
I don't think any of them were terrible. There was none of them very good, if that's what you mean.
What was your position or job when you were in the Army?
Pardon?
What was your position or job when you were in the Army?
I was a
Your ranking?
T5 was my rank. I wound up as a quote an investigator, but we were moved around an awful lot. At one time, I was actually cooking. Nobody died, and they all survived the food. But it was a deal where if you volunteered to cook, you worked for 24 hours, and then you got 2 days off. So this was, of course, after the war. The 2 days gave you free time to travel around Germany and so on and so forth.
Where were you stationed?
Pardon?
Where were you stationed in the Army?
Well, I landed in Le Havre. That's where I got off the boat. I went to a small town called Le Francport in France, where I took basic. I then went to Ludwigshafen, which was a target for Allied bombers, because that's where they made the ball bearings for all their armaments. And from there, I went up in a place called Schwäbisch Gmünd, which is down in southern Germany. Very beautiful country. And duty was good then, because there was no war going on. So we chased the Frauleins and drank beer and had a hell of a lot of fun.
And you enlisted in the Army, correct? You enlisted?
I enlisted, yeah.
Was it difficult to adapt to Army life for you?
Yeah, it was very difficult. You're uprooted from a home. The first 5 days were hell. You're sleeping on the canvas, it's pouring rain, mud all over the place. Food was lousy. Yeah. It ain't home.
And how was your experience with the training camps?
With the training camp?
Yeah.
Well, that was tough, because you got to get up at the crack of dawn, stand formation. You got so long to eat, get back, and you got to train all day. Many days you got to go 25-mile hike or 30-mile hike, full pack, the whole 9 yards. Blisters all over your feet. But I think it's good for you. Yeah.
Did you keep in touch with your friends and family while you were over?
It was not easy, because all the communications were destroyed. All of the transportation was destroyed. There wasn't a bridge that you could cross the Rhine on, hardly. The first leave I got from Germany, it took me to go from Schwäbisch Hall, Germany, to London, 8 days. About 9 months or a year later, I made that same journey in under 36 hours. Everything had improved. The rail lines were being rebuilt, and so on and so forth. Well,
where were you when the war ended?
I was in a place called Schwäbisch Gmünd.
And how did you return home? What were your feelings when you returned home?
Well, I thought I was big stuff when I got off the boat in New York, and the bands were playing and everything. I wondered what the hell was going on. And then we shipped to Kilmer, I think it was, and for 3 days, and then to Dix, where I was officially separated.
And how did your family and friends react to your homecoming? Did you see them?
Well, they did. There was no homecoming, because all my family and friends were in England. I had a grandmother and a grandfather that lived in the Buffalo area. And I went up there and stayed with them for a while until I got Americanized. And then I subsequently, of course, went back to Europe on the GI Bill.
Was it hard to readjust to civilian life after you served in the war?
A little bit, I suppose, but not that difficult.
Did you, or have you kept in touch with any fellow veterans over the years?
Well, yes. We had an association, and we had annual get-togethers. Unfortunately, we don't have them anymore because they've all died off. There aren't any more left.
And how did your wartime affect your life? What life lessons did you learn from being in the war?
Well, as I think it was President Roosevelt said, war is hell. War is just unconscionable and stupid, and why mankind continue to kill each other for greed or whatever, or power, I just can't figure it out. Because who suffers? War isn't like it used to be, where they all went out with pitchforks in the middle of a field and had at it. Now it's the women and the children and the babies and the kids that are impacted and suffer. Look at what happened in Japan when we dropped the bomb. I'm all in favor of that because there would have been thousands and thousands of lives lost if we'd had to invade Japan. So I know the first one was what, Nagasaki?
Hiroshima?
Huh?
Hiroshima?
Oh, yeah, Hiroshima was the first one. You know, there was 169 some thousand people killed, and it was a hell of a price to pay. But there would have been hundreds and hundreds of thousands of troops killed on both sides had we had a land war in Japan. So that's where I see it.
I was kind of curious. You were a young boy, a teenager in London, or around London.
Yeah.
What was life like during the air raids? What was your daily life like with the German air raids?
Well, during the Blitz, it was all nighttime bombing, right?
Yes.
Now you could almost set your watch by what time they'd show up, and you could almost set it. We had what they called Anderson shelters. It was like a tin structure, corrugated metal. You dig it down into the ground about that far, and then you take the surplus earth and pile it up on top. So we used to sleep in there. The whole family would sleep in there. Then they had another one called the Morrison, which was a steel table with a heavy wire surround. And that you could use in the house. If the house collapsed, that would support the weight of the house. And you always kept it against the wall, because when a wall goes, it goes that way. You don't want to get hit with that part. You just want this to fold over on you. So the safest place is always at the wall. But I've been chased by flaming onions on my bicycle. You wouldn't know what a flaming onion is.
No idea.
Well, we called them flaming onions. The Germans would drop like landmines, or the mines they use in the ocean, on a parachute with flares on it. And you could just see this sucker going around the sky. And if it started heading your direction, you better move fast. So we called those flaming onions. And of course, the street we lived on, it was open fields here. So they would bring an AK gun down there every night, all night long. It would shake the house, and we had a Yale lock. It would always open the front door because it would shake the lock till it opened. I got machine gunned once doing a paper route on a Sunday morning by he was either drunk or a loner. He decided to come over in a Messerschmitt, and he was just shooting people up. This place called Shakespeare Avenue, and I just laid down in the gutter, and they sent a plane up from Northolt, which was a fighter base. He knocked him down. They sent another one up, knocked him down. Finally, an Australian guy got him, shot him down. He obviously was not authorized. He must have just decided to come over to England and raise a little hell, because, you know, Channel's only 20. It's only a hop, skip, and a jump from France over to London. You know, a few minutes by air.
What was it like? We've had a lot of people who are Americans living at the beginning of the war, and the rationing in the United States. What was it? What did you get? What sacrifices did England have to go through during the Blitz? And you know, what was? How did life change when the war began?
Well, when the war began, it was sort of what we called, because you got to remember, the war began there in '39. You guys got in. In fact, Churchill said that the greatest day of his life was when Pearl Harbor was hit. And he said that because it now committed America. Prior to that, America was sitting on the fence because of their experience in the Great War, the First World War. Let's not get involved in Europe, right? Yeah. But this kind of forced them to get involved. But how did life change? Yeah. Well, it changed in as much as you couldn't get any food, number one. You were allowed 2 ounces of meat a week, 1 ounce of lard, butter, or margarine, 1 egg. And they had what they called national bread. There was only one bread available. It was that was it. You take it or leave it. Clothing was rationed. Of course, the mode of transportation in England then were not automobiles. It was basically bicycles or public transportation. That continued to operate as best it could, as did the rail lines and everything else. But at night, when they came, the bombers came, most of the Londoners would go down into tube stations, what you call the underground, and they would be down there by the hundreds of thousands. And I guess they all had a damn good time down there too. They used to sing songs and just have a great party down in the underground. Then when the all clear went, they'd all go home. How did it affect industry? If they had daylight bombing, quite a bit. For a period of time, I was what they called an air raid spotter, because if a plane came over England, the sirens go. Now, one plane. You can't shut a nation down because of one plane. But they did initially. So that stopped production. So he said, we got to do better than that. We'll sound the siren, but you keep working. And somebody is appointed as a spotter. Gets up on the roof of the factory or a high point. And when he hears a plane approaching, he's got a siren that he blows. Then they all run for cover. But they keep working until they have to run. Otherwise, one aircraft could shut down the production of the whole country, right? Yeah. So that's how they handled that.
With the bombing at night, eventually the RAF kind of took over and won the skies over Europe. Was it a gradual thing, or did the bombing kind of...
Well, wait a minute. Over Europe, you're saying?
Yes.
Well, now you're talking about us bombing them.
Well, when did the bombing stop on London?
Well, the bombing stopped in 1941.
Okay.
Early 41, before Pearl Harbor, because there was what they called the phony war. From 1939, 1940, It wasn't until Hitler pushed us off at Dunkirk that there was really any war that affected us in England. That was called the Phony War. And then, of course, he was going to invade Great Britain, and the first thing he was going to do is flatten us from the skies. And they did do a lot of night bombing, and they also did a lot of daylight bombing. And at that point, the RAF won the Battle of Britain. And that was Winston Churchill who said, "Never in the history of mankind was so much owed by so many to so few." He was referring to the young guys in the RAF that fought off the Germans. A lot of those young men probably trained over here at Sugar Land down on the Lake Okeechobee. I don't know if you knew that the RAF trained here in Florida. I used to go to they used to come over once a year, and we'd go over there to Clewiston, and all get together and have a party.
Wow.
Yeah, and but a lot of those guys went back after they were trained. A week later, they were history. You know, like I said, war is hell. On the other hand, unfortunately, sometimes you maybe have no option. Otherwise, you become a total pacifist. So I don't know the answers. If you ever get them, be sure to call me collect. I'll be glad to pay for the call. I don't know the answers, but I don't want any part of war. It's too bad that mankind, all through history, has never found the ability to coexist peacefully. And I believe in a supreme being, and I guess the whole show is in his hands. Because we have proven through thousands of years that we can't coexist. Read the papers, trouble all over the world every day. Somebody's trying to kill this one or that one or this or that. And so where does it all end?
When you said you were after the war, you were investigating cases in Germany.
That was during the war.
During the war. Can you explain some of those things? Maybe some interesting stories, or a story that kind of stands out in your mind as one of the cases that comes.
Yeah, you know, you probably don't realize this, but do you know what a DP is?
No.
A DP is a displaced person. Europe was overcome with DPs. Now, they were mostly people that were brought into Germany, forced labor, to produce armaments for the war. I have a very good friend. He's a structural engineer, or was retired, out in California. There's a young Polish boy. Well, he was a young Polish boy. When I went back to school there, he went at the same school, and I became acquainted with him. The Germans came into his house, and he was hiding in the attic. But they went up in the attic, and they got him. And forced him into forced labor. Again, you got to read history, but Roosevelt, when Roosevelt joined into the war, when you guys got into the war, I got to get my facts straight here a little bit. Yeah, I've got this story. I don't know if you realize that like in 36, 37, Poland was partitioned.
Yeah.
Right, this young boy was taken into Russia to work as a slave labor. But when Roosevelt got in, there was an agreement that they let all those guys go and join their own military, which they did. Now there is still today in London the Free Polish Government. I don't know if you know that or not. There's still a Polish government in London and a government in Poland. And the Free Polish Government, excuse me, took a lot of money with them, and they sponsored education for these young fellas in England, and that's where I met him. But as a result of his experiences, if he held a cup on a saucer, even today, the cup will dance on the saucer. He never got over that traumatic event. He subsequently came over here. Matter of fact, I sponsored him into this country. And he's a very smart guy, and he's a retired professional engineer in California now. Yeah.
Since you spent time in London and you grew up in England and the bombing and were, targeted necessarily not personally, but your town was by the Germans. Did you hold any ill will towards the Germans?
Well, I enlisted in the Army. I could have dragged it out, I suppose, with one objective: to go to Europe and kill Germans. Why? Stupidity, youth, but a burning anger about what they subjected us to. And I don't know if you ever remember a Air Force guy by the name of Harris, Bomber Harris, the Dresden firestorm. Oh, he organized that. And of course, I guess a year or 2 or 3 years ago, in Dresden, was a hell of a big stink because they erected a monument in his honor. But firestorms are very interesting. It happened in London many times. Fire needs oxygen. And if you get a fire going intense enough, it'll take huge trees and suck them right into the fire. It creates surface winds over 200 miles an hour. These are firestorms. The other thing I might add here is when I first got to Germany, places like Stuttgart, Ludwigshafen, walls were all standing, but there was no roofs and no windows. Our bombing did a hell of a job on Germany. It really did. And of course, that's why I hate war. Who got killed? Soldiers? No. Mothers, children, babies. No good. So, anything else, or?
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Put on record.
Well, just a lot of foolish stuff. That probably doesn't mean a hell of a lot. After hostilities ceased in Germany, and I was there shortly thereafter, everybody would be celebrating with their weapons. And they used to use tracer bullets. At nighttime, the sky would be full of these red bullets going through the air, which I always thought was amusing. Of course, that great General Patton, Blood and Guts, was killed about 4 miles from where I was stationed. I remember the day he was killed there in a Jeep accident. Almost lost my leg once to I guess it was this one. I was sitting on a tank going around the corner on cobblestones, and it slid, and there was a big tree there. And I had to get my leg out before I got between the tank and the tree, otherwise I would have lost this leg. Lots of times I almost got it from buzz bombs, if you know what they are.
No.
Huh?
No, I have no idea what a buzz bomb is.
You have no idea what a, they're called a V1?
Okay, yeah.
That's a buzz bomb. Operated with a gyroscope, set the fly on a certain course, and when it runs out of fuel, it's supposed to do this 30 seconds later. But, and I've had 2 or 3 experiences with those. One time laying on the floor, under the table, we had a French window, and we had trees in the backyard. And about 8 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, maybe 7:30, we heard it coming. I went right through the tree. Now, if it had stopped, I wouldn't be talking to you. So a few things like that, but other than that, it's been a great life and a great experience, and I thank the Lord for it. That's it.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in.
All right, you're welcome.
We're going to take this off of you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, I'll walk you out.
Okay, that would be very nice.
Questions?
I'll be right